Yes.
Welcome.
Okay. Yeah.
Good evening and welcome all of you. Welcome to the second edition of this particular presentation done by Dr. Premanand and Dr. Prasanth VG. Today, after a brief introduction from Dr. Premanand, I'll move on with Aristotle. Over to you, Prem.
Thank you, Prasanth. So this system of literary criticism we have brought out because many of you wanted this to be taken, and many of you, although especially in the sixth semester, you have already had this as your lesson. Many wanted a revision, and for those in fourth semester, it will be good for you to learn this so that you will be able to tackle your exams very well. And I'm very thankful to Dr. Prasanth for coming in and helping out. When I told him that there were inquiries like this, he immediately said yes, and let's go ahead with it. So thank you, Prasanth. And what you need to do is, usually at 8 o'clock, you need to look into www.englishskillsone.com. You are very aware of it, and there you will have a button, and as you press the button, automatically you can get into YouTube, or you subscribe to the channel and you will get a notification. So these are the two different options that you can try out, and we are going to make it almost regular. What you need to do is use the chat effectively, and whatever doubts you have, you can put it over there, and you will be able to get the answers from us either that day or the next day. Now, on top of this literary criticism, which is going to come up in your BA English section of EnglishSkillsOne.com, there will be a band. And in that band, you will have a quiz. You are requested to, or you should do the quiz so that you will have a thorough knowledge of the subject. So usually what will happen is the previous lessons quiz will be put up there. Now we are going to put up Plato. We have finished Plato. Plato is already online. Please have a look at it. And the quiz is also going to be live tomorrow, and have a attempt that so that you will be able to get very good marks during your examinations. Once closer to your examination, I'll again open it up so that you can have a double revision. So thank you, Dr. Prasanth, for coming in, and over to you, Prasanth.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Prem. The informations you have been receiving with respect to this class will not be there from tomorrow. Instead, you visit the website www.englishskillsone.com, and you can even subscribe and then get the notifications. Today, I welcome all the participants. You can communicate with me either during the class or at the end of the class through chat, which is available in your screen. Today, we move on to Aristotle after Plato. Plato had a wonderful disciple called Aristotle. And Aristotle's Poetics is the one work that has survived apart from his rhetoric. So we will be looking at major concepts in your syllabus. That is, one is poetics. The syllabus is what you see on the screen right now. Mimesis. We had a discussion of mimesis earlier. Catharsis, hamartia, his defense of poetry, his definition of tragedy, the constituent parts of tragedy that Aristotle has laid down, plot, tragic hero, and three unities, comedy, epic, and poetic style. So these are the topics that we are going to discuss today. And of course, followed by a question and answer session. As the first point, I would like to mention that Aristotle is a very celebrated disciple of Plato, as Plato was a celebrated disciple of Socrates. Only two works survive. We are not very sure whether he had done more works. Of course, in those days, writing a book was almost impossible. There was no paper, there was no invention of any kind of printing. So his books that we have today would have been his lectures delivered to his disciples. So maybe from disciples' entry or maybe their memory, it has been recreated and maybe put into a book form. So only two works of Aristotle survive. One is Poetics, that is to do with art of poetry, and the next is Rhetoric, dealing with the art of speaking, which were the two prominent realm of expression in those days. Poetics contains 26 small chapters, likely to be the summary of his lectures to his pupils, likely to be a kind of a 1 hour lecture or maybe a 1.5 hour lecture. It's a very small chapter running up to a page or 1.5 pages in our present day scenario. Chapters are dedicated to poetry, tragedy, diction, that is poetic diction, writing of poetry or language, epic, and comparison. Comparison between poetry and tragedy, poetry and satire, etc., etc. Main focus on tragedy, that was the most developed form in those days. So Aristotle had at length dealt with tragedy. Of course, he also had comments on poetry, satire, epic, but the well developed or most of the chapters, almost 5 to 6 chapters, were devoted to tragedy alone. Maybe he has discussed other aspects, we have lost them, or maybe he may not have discussed other varieties or genres later. He agrees with Plato. Let us first place Aristotle in the pedestal. Agrees with Plato that art is imitation. The theory of mimesis, the theory of imitation, is agreed upon by Aristotle. And he also said that, following Plato, that there is a natural pleasure in imitation. And still, you know that mimicry is one of the most celebrated or maybe much appreciated art form even today. So imitation is something very natural, very genuine that people do, or maybe either for the fun of it or to make fun of somebody. And imitation has always had its own place in the entire discourse. Poetry reveals the truths of a permanent and universal kind. So he initially, in the Poetics, he makes a comparison between history and poetry. History that records the past, what has happened, and poetry that might deal with what might happen. Of course, poetry does not actually deal with something that's actually happened, or it only deals with something that is likely to happen. Because none of the stories, even you take a Shakespearean play or maybe a Greek play or even a Sanskrit play, it all presents a likely scenario. Even if Shakespeare is doing a historical play, the actual events may not be depicted. He would recreate the entire incidents suiting his own mode of presentation. And you understand that Shakespeare has taken so much liberties with history and even the stories that he has taken as a model or source of the text. So when you compare between poetry and history, history deals with what has actually happened, and poetry deals with what is likely to happen. And Aristotle comes to the conclusion that poetry is more philosophical and of a higher pedestal than that of history because it tends to express the universal while history expresses the particular. History actually expresses what has actually happened in one particular place or by one particular person. Whereas literature, especially poetry, only poetry and drama were prevalent in those days. Novel and short story was not there. So naturally, what you understand is that uh, poetry is more philosophical and more placed at a more higher realm by Aristotle because it deals with a universal concept, universal appeal. It has a universal appeal because anybody, even if you read and enjoy a poem written in a different, altogether different geographical area or in a different continent, even you are still able to enjoy it because poetry very often deals with the universality. Otherwise, a play written by Shakespeare almost 500 years before cannot be actually read and enjoyed by a present day generation. Still, Shakespeare inspires many, meaning art can actually deal with the universe, whereas history always deals with the particular. He also answers many of the questions that has been allegations laid down by Plato, especially with respect to, I would like to say, especially with respect to poetic pleasure. Plato was very critical about the pleasure that poetry and drama creates, whereas Aristotle maintains that such pleasure is aesthetic, not something which is meant to harm anybody. See, just for example, I can tell you one thing. See, we very often say that certain movies make people bad, or certain characters in the movies make people bad, or maybe they set a bad example. I don't think this particular statement seems to hold water, simply because if a movie like Kayankulam Kochundi makes a person robber, then definitely a film on Mahatma Gandhi would make a person a savior or a kind of a great person. It never happens. Whatever is depicted in the movie or a play, I don't think it has a great effect on the audience. They might just watch it and just forget it. Because the pleasure that is invented, I can also give another example. In a movie, if you create, or in a play, if you make the scene of a death, for example, that would actually provide certain kind of a pleasure to the reader. Pleasure in the sense, if a bad man comes to a, I mean, if the hero punishes the villain towards the end of the play, then that death of a villain actually creates a kind of a aesthetic satisfaction to the audience. Even you know that an accident that is, you watch it on a movie, or a patient being operated on a table in a movie, would give a kind of a aesthetic pleasure to the reader. Whereas if you watch it in a original, whereas it happens in front of your house, or maybe you are taken into a hospital where you see a something, I mean, a kind of where we are in front of a casualty, where you see an accident case being brought in, the feeling you have is altogether different. So what Aristotle maintains is that when you watch a play, the pleasure you have is not something related to the natural kind of a pleasure that you enjoy every day, but it is a kind of a pleasure which can be called aesthetic. And such pleasure is harmless. So this is how Plato answers Aristotle. I mean, Aristotle answers Plato. And pleasure is the end, as the end of poetry. Any poetic device has an end called pressure. So what I have in mind is that the classical definition of art can also be equally be applied to poetry. The classical definition applied to art is that art instructs through delight. These are the two areas that classical definition, as per classical definition, poetry or art has two different functions. One is the instruction or instruct part, that is teaching. Then another is delight, providing pleasure. So the definition can be simplified by saying that art or poetry teaches by providing pleasure. So initially it provides pleasure, and through pleasure you are taken into a kind of a truth, right? So you may be reminded of the poems of Robert Frost. Begins in a very simple manner, very simple situations are taken, and it leads to a very profane or profound truth, right? So two roads diverge in a wood, etc., etc. And I took the one that is less traveled by, that has made all the difference. So you understand that a very simple situation where in which I think we almost every day come across, right? You and I every day I think reaches a particular place where the roads are diverged, right? Then you take one particular path which is either less traveled by or maybe more traveled by, depending upon your choice. So any form of art teaches you through delight, by providing delight. So this delight is exactly what I explained just now, that is the aesthetic pleasure. He also downplays the question of morality that raised by Plato. He said that such questions need not occur because when you play the part of a villain, Plato said that when you play the part of villain, villainy penetrates into your character. He says, no, nothing of that sort will happen because the character who acts knows fully well that he is only acting. And however, a number of times that this particular actor acts as a villain or a bad character or evil character, that evilness will never penetrate into his own character because such things actually does not work in the same manner as we have it in our own lives, right? It happens on a altogether different aesthetic level, right? Poetry makes the immediate appeal to emotions. That also was objected by Plato. Plato objected to the poetry appealing to emotions. And Aristotle says there is nothing wrong in that. Being emotional, we will be moved by certain things. Definitely, there are certain stories or movies that you watch where you cannot control your tears. There are also movies and literature, especially prose, which you cannot control your laughter. So such things are a natural response to a situation that you and I witness. And he also makes a statement that tragedy is taken as the highest form of poetry. Aristotle considers tragedy as a supreme above all other art forms. Earlier, it was the position was held by epic, but Aristotle places tragedy above epic because only tragedy that arouses pity and fear in the mind of the audience, leading to a catharsis. I think which these terms will be explaining in the next slide better. Rejecting Plato, he considers poetry as not harmful but artistically satisfying. This is the next point. This is in continuation with the point I just made. So poetry is aesthetically, artistically satisfying. And he makes a distinction between the real emotion and aesthetic emotion. Aesthetic emotion is the emotion aroused by language or poetry or even drama or tragedy. Poetry can imitate two kinds of actions. One, noble actions of good men, that is done in epic and tragedy. And the mean is substandard, action of bad men, satire and comedy. So he also maintains that tragedy happens when man, of course, when I say man, I also mean women, but in those days, I think this particular word men occurred everywhere, right? Maybe there were no women characters who has taken up roles, and I don't think there was any women writers either in those days. So very often and frequently you have men figuring in my presentation. Maybe I'm sorry that I should have used men and women actually, but I mean men and women when I use men. So when you have poetry happen or tragedy happens when a person attempts to become better than he is, when he is going to go up in the scale, up in ladder, there is a tragedy. നമ്മൾ സാധാരണ പറയുന്നുണ്ട് മറ്റേ എന്താ പറയുക വീഴ്ചയുടെ ആഴം കണക്കാക്കുന്നത് ഹൈറ്റ് ആണ്. അപ്പോൾ കൂടുതൽ ഉയരത്തിലേക്ക് പോകുമ്പോഴാണ് ട്രാജഡി ഉണ്ടാവും. ആൻഡ് കോമഡി ഹാപ്പൻസ് വെൻ മാൻ അറ്റംപ്റ്റ്സ് ടു ബിക്കം ലോവർ ദാൻ ഹി. അയാളുടെ നിലവാരത്തിൽ നിന്ന് താഴോട്ട് വരുമ്പോൾ കോമഡി, മുകളിലേക്ക് പോകുമ്പോൾ ട്രാജഡി ഉണ്ടാവുന്നു എന്നാണ് അരിസ്റ്റോട്ടിൽ പറഞ്ഞതിൻ്റെ ഒരു അർത്ഥം. So what I mean to say is that noble actions of good men, you have epic and comedy, and subordinate or mundane action of bad men deals with satire and comedy. So thus epic and tragedy is considered superior to satire and comedy. Among epic and tragedy, Aristotle considers tragedy as superior because only tragedy can lead to a catharsis. I'll be coming to catharsis next slide. Tragedy is an imitation of an action that is serious, complete, and of a certain magnitude. So this is the definition he provides for tragedy. It's an imitation of action because all art is imitation, which is serious, complete, and of certain length. And serious action means a tale of suffering, exciting pity and fear. So I'll be explaining this here at this point further. See, what exactly you mean by pity and fear? See, when a tragedy happens, especially when a man attempts to become better than he is, when the action of good men coming to a bad end, that is the usual mode of tragedy. You have sympathy towards the hero. That is what you call by pity. Pity is a sympathy you have towards the hero because of his own suffering. You see that this good man has to bear so many unfortunate or misgivings because he is going through a tragedy. So when you see a good man undergoing or rather suffering all these adverse scenario in his life or events in his life, you definitely have a natural kind of a sympathy or pity towards this particular person. മലയാളത്തിൽ കിരീടം എന്നുള്ള സിനിമ നിങ്ങൾ കണ്ടിട്ടുണ്ടോ? മോഹൻലാലിന്റെ ഒരു ട്രാജിക് മൂവിയാണ്. ആ മൂവിയിലെ ഒരു വലിയ പ്രത്യേകത എന്ന് പറയുന്നത് നമ്മളെപ്പോലെ സാധാരണ ഒരു മനുഷ്യൻ വളരെ നിസ്സാരമായ ഒരു കാരണത്താൽ ഒരു ട്രാജഡിയിലേക്ക് തള്ളപ്പെടുകയാണ്. He had every possibility of becoming a police officer, but just because of a conflict he develops with a villain in the play, in the movie, but such kind of a tragedy when you watch, or you watch a play like Oedipus Rex, where Oedipus is a good man who was very innocent, who never had any evil intention. He has to resort to a tragedy. So when you see such action, you develop a pity or sympathy towards the hero. And fear. Fear is what happens in your mind, leading to catharsis. Catharsis is a purification. See, these two feelings has to be aroused in your mind. One is a pity towards the hero. And number two, fear. What is fear? Fear is what you have in mind. You understand that even such a good person like this character, he has to undergo tragedy, right? For example, in Mahabharata, I can take an example from Mahabharata. Yudhishthira or Dharmaputra, he never lied in his life, not even a single lie. He only had a half lie, ഒരു അരക്കള്ളമാണ് അദ്ദേഹം പറഞ്ഞത്, entire life. But he had to spend some time in hell because he said this half lie. So if you watch a play like that, what happens is that you have sympathy towards Yudhishthira because he was such a good man, never lied in his life. He had to spend his time in hell. And you also have a fear in your mind that if he had to spend this much time in hell, what will be my situation? That is the kind of a fear you develop. And if you have these two feelings, pity towards the hero and fear in your mind, it leads to a catharsis. Catharsis is a purification of emotion, meaning you will definitely have a purification of emotions. That is, your bad qualities, your bad emotions are purified. And you suddenly begin to understand that even for a small loss like this, if for a small mistakes that we do in our life, there will be a kind of a punishment. If you do good deeds, there will be reward. So this kind of a morality functions, or maybe this kind of a moral concern is rather highlighted or uplifted by this particular play that you and I watch. This is what Aristotle means by catharsis. And a play should be complete with a, what is the meaning of the play should be complete? Complete in the sense, it should have a proper beginning, middle, and an end. Or it should have an organic unity. And magnitude or length of the play, he says, a length which can easily be embraced by memory. In those days, the plays were very short, right? Just like a modern English movies, which runs only up to maybe 1 hour or 1.5 hours. Unlike Malayalam movies, which run normally 2.5 hours, right? So it can easily be remembered. The point Aristotle maintains that an ordinary spectator should be able to remember what has happened in the play throughout, right? So that is the magnitude of the play. And then Aristotle comes to the talk about the 6 constituent parts of tragedy, right? Plot, character, thought, diction, song, and spectacle. This is I've written in the order. This is order. Plot is the supreme. Plot is the arrangement of incidents, and Aristotle considers plot as the soul of tragedy, which I'll be talking about in the next slide. Importance to plot. Without action, there cannot be a tragedy. There may be without character, right? He says that Plot is so important. Without plot, you can never have a tragedy. But you can even theoretically have a tragedy without character. Of course, it doesn't say how it is possible. But even without a character, you can have a tragedy. But without plot, you cannot have a tragedy. So he assigns a supreme importance to plot. Character is next in importance, right? What is character? Character is tragedy imitates men in action and their deeds. So men and their action is presented in the form of character. And the thoughts of the character on his or her feelings are revealed in the speech. Moral and emotional reactions to the circumstances. That is the third level, that is called thought. And the medium of diction of words embellished with each kind of artistic ornament. That is the diction. So I've been referring to, as I have on my left side, there's a shorter slide, which you can just watch that. Plot number 1, character number 2, thought number 3, diction is the language. Language that is employed. So the thought of this particular character is revealed to the audience by his language. See, I can give you another example for, at this particular point of reference. You know that in Shakespeare's time, there was no curtains. Curtains were not there. Electricity was not there. So you cannot have a artificial lighting. So what exactly happened when Shakespeare presented his plays is that he made the language substitute all these. For example, Hamlet is a play which opens at midnight. Exactly, it opens 2 or 3 minutes before midnight. And you all know that the play in those days were presented in the daylight, because you cannot present a play in the night because no electricity was available. So how can Shakespeare present a play and convince the audience that it is the middle of the night? So he used language. So each and every time the character opens up his mind and communicates to the audience through language. So Aristotle has placed language as 4, and followed by spectacle and song and spectacle. Song, I think, enhances a particular mood, just like you have a song in a movie. And spectacle is the kind of what you can say, the in a movie, if you have a assimilation, it can be something like a stunt, or something that a spectacle is something that dazzles you, something that you are actually encouraged to think of, something like that. So അപ്പോൾ എന്തെങ്കിലും തരത്തിലുള്ള ഈ നിങ്ങൾ അതിശയിപ്പിക്കുന്ന എന്തെങ്കിലും കാര്യങ്ങളാണ് ഈ സ്പെക്ടക്കിൾ എന്ന വാക്കുകൊണ്ട് ഷേക്സ്പിയർ ഉദ്ദേശിക്കുന്നത്. ചിലപ്പോൾ ഫൈറ്റ് സീനായിരിക്കാം, സ്റ്റണ്ട് സീനുകളായിരിക്കാം, or any other situation which will arouse your curiosity, right? Then we have, at this point I already made, plot is the soul of tragedy. Then we move to 3 unities that Shakespeare has actually. This is one of the major questions that it can also appear in the exam. 3 unities refer to our unity of action, unity of time, and unity of place. And Aristotle has never emphasized that 3 unities should be, all the playwrights should observe these 3 unities. These are only guidelines. But he talks at length about the first unity, that is unity of action. Meaning, there was also a concept, or maybe a convention in Greek drama, that number of characters should be limited to 4 or 5. If the number of characters are limited to 4 or 5, you cannot have multiple stories, right? So in many Greek plays, they had limited number of characters, and the story or the plot disclosed or maybe revealed the story of a single character. Maybe one story is the only story in the play. Whereas when you come down to Shakespeare, Shakespeare has employed multiple plots. You have a main plot and a parallel plot, maybe 2 parallel plots, right? So this is something which is very much prevalent in later plays. But Aristotle said it is better to observe unity of action. The action should center on one particular character, and only his or her story should be there. It should not be complicated with subordinate plots or parallel plots. One story happening, on the other hand, so there is another story happening in the same mode, and it will make people, spectator, difficult to understand and follow the two parallel plots at the same time in those days. Then he talks about unity of time, that is the conformity between the events of the play and the time taken. That is, he says that it should be maximum 12 hours or 24 hours. The story of the play should be over with one revolution of the sun. One time sun revolves around the earth. That is 24 hours. Maximum time taken for the play should be 12 or 24 hours. It is also very difficult to observe this particular, because in 12 hours or for 24 hours, no story can come to an end. A story has to develop, and then we'll have to go through different aspects or maybe different levels to become complete. So it takes a longer time for a story to come to an end naturally. So this is a unity which is quite difficult. Shakespeare, for example, never paid any attention to these unities. I think only in Tempest that he has maintained this particular three unities. And unity of place. This is a convention, I think. This is nothing to do with a rule, but it is rather a convention or a എന്താ പറയുക, ഒരു സൗകര്യത്തിന് വേണ്ടിയിട്ടായിരിക്കും ഇങ്ങനെ പറഞ്ഞിട്ടുണ്ടാവും. That the background of the story remain one place. Because you cannot have curtains, you cannot have a change of setting. ഇപ്പം നമുക്ക് നാടകത്തിലൊക്കെ ചേഞ്ച് ഓഫ് സെറ്റിംഗ് പറ്റും, പല പല സ്റ്റേജുകളിലും റിവോൾവിംഗ് സ്റ്റേജ് ഒക്കെ ഉണ്ട്. സോ യു ക്യാൻ ഹാവ് ഒരു ഷോട്ട് ഇവിടെ കാണിച്ച അടുത്ത ഷോട്ട് വേറെ സ്ഥലത്ത് കാണിക്കും. But in those days, it was very difficult for you to have change the place. So he also said there should be the play should stick to one place. So these are the three unities. Unity of action, it should not be complicated with subordinate plot. Unity of time, it should happen in 12 or 24-hour format. Unity of place, that is, it should stick to one place as a background. The last two unities were never stressed and considered essential for a good play by Aristotle. But somehow it was percolated as three very important notion laid out by Aristotle. But Aristotle never stressed that these are very essential for the tragedy. Now we come to the next part. You need to pay some attention to the chart I have provided on my left side. A good tragic plot should arouse pity and fear in the spectator. Pity for the undeserved suffering of the hero, and fear of the worst that may happen to him or the spectator. So it can be both, right? Pity and fear arousing at the same time. The change of fortune should not from bad to good, but reversely from good to bad. So what is the change of fortune? See, if the hero had all the fortunes, all the plus points, you cannot have a tragedy. You can have a tragedy only when the hero has to suffer, or he has to confront a loss or a misfortune. So the change of fortune should not be from bad to good. That will not be a tragedy. Bad to good is something which everybody would like to happen. It's not called a tragedy. It is the other way around. From something good, somebody should fall, and then only you have a tragedy. The unhappy ending is the only right ending and most tragic. If a bad man comes to a good end, or a very good man coming to a bad end, none of this will be ideally suited for a tragedy. So what should be a tragedy? And here I would like to introduce another word, which is actually not there in my slide. The word is hamartia. I have just asked a question on hamartia. Now I'll explain. At this point, I can just explain what it is. Hamartia is a tragic flaw, or a folly in character, weakness in character. For example, Macbeth. Macbeth was ambitious. Hamlet was indecisive. He couldn't make a decision, right? King Lear had excess of love towards his children, and Othello was suspicious of his wife. So these are the tragic flaws. So a tragic hero, what kind of a person is tragic hero? A tragic hero is an average person, or a noble person with a mixture of good and bad in him. And there is also a weakness in him. He is not a 100% good man coming to a bad end. That is not a good tragedy. Aristotle maintains that an average person, or maybe a nobler kind of a person who is quite good in himself, comes to a bad end because of his own tragic flaw. He has a tragic flaw, maybe ambition, maybe suspicion, maybe jealousy. And because of this particular weakness, he has to come to a bad end. Othello never suspected his wife in the beginning, but later he began to suspect, and whenever he suspected, he got enough evidences to add fuel to his suspicion. And at the end, he decides to strangle her, kill her, and he strangled her. Then only he understood that she was innocent. So that kind of a flaw. And Othello was a very good character, except that he had a flaw. That flaw is called hamartia, and that leads to his tragedy. The plot, as I said you, the last point in this particular slide, the plot is complicated, complication and denouement, rising and falling action. And Aristotle actually talked about the rising action and the falling action. But later, this particular pyramid structure was implemented to refer to drama with an exposition, that is introduction, rising action, that is action rises to climax. Climax is at one point from where the action cannot go further up. It has to come down, falling action. So rising action is also called complication, when things get complicated and reaches to a climax. And then falling action is called a denouement. Both words I have given here, complication and denouement. That is another word is rising action and falling action. This will be explaining further in the later presentations. And Aristotle, we are coming to some of the key concepts here. Simple and complex plot. He distinguishes simple plot from a complex plot. What is a simple plot? With no puzzling situations. There is no anagnorisis or peripeteia. These are the two terms you have to be familiar with. Look at the spelling also. Anagnorisis is the discovery or recognition. If you take the story of Othello, the discovery that Desdemona was innocent is the discovery that Othello makes. The discovery that Macbeth makes, the discovery that Hamlet makes, or any other play, in any other tragedy, typical Shakespearean or Greek tragedy, where they make. In Oedipus, Oedipus recognizes that he is the man, he is the villain of the play. He is the one who has actually killed his own father and married his own mother. So the very discovery that he is the victim, he is the man who brought plague to Thebes, that discovery is called anagnorisis. That is, the hero recognizes his mistake. Then, from that recognition onwards, there is a reversal of situation. Until then, everything is going in his favor. But from there onwards, the situation reverses. In a complex plot, you have anagnorisis and peripeteia, discovery and reversal of situation. This leads to pity and fear, and thereby a catharsis. This is how Aristotle has maintained it. But in a simple plot, no anagnorisis and peripeteia happen. And he also talks about tragic hero. Who can be tragic hero? I just mentioned it last slide. Neither an eminently good man hurled from prosperity to adversity, from good end to a bad end, nor a bad man raised from adversity to prosperity. വളരെ നല്ല അവസ്ഥയിൽ നിന്ന് മോശം അവസ്ഥയിലേക്ക് വരുന്ന ഒരു നല്ല ആളോ, മോശം അവസ്ഥയിൽ നിന്ന് നല്ല അവസ്ഥയിലേക്ക് വരുന്ന ഒരു ബാഡ് മാനോ, neither of them are good for tragic hero. So a man who is not eminently good or just, yet whose misfortune is brought about not by vice or depravity, but by some error or fertility. This is the kind of a tragic hero Aristotle is planning. That is, a man who is not eminently good, but whose misfortune is brought about by a error, which is called hamartia. Hamartia is that particular error that the character has. So the tragic hero must be a character with a folly, character with a weakness, And it is this weakness that brings him to tragedy. And this is called harsha. Now he also talks about comedy. His observations on comedy are: comedy has its roots in satire, originated from the phallic songs sung in honor of Dionysius, and epic derived from the hymns, that is, the songs sung in praise of gods. Whereas satire originated from the songs sung in honor of Dionysius, especially phallic songs. ഇപ്പം നമ്മൾ കൊടുങ്ങല്ലൂരൊക്കെ ഭരണിപ്പാട്ട് എന്നൊക്കെ പറഞ്ഞ് കേട്ടിട്ടുണ്ട്. അതൊക്കെ ഈ തരത്തിലുള്ള പാട്ടുകളാണ്. കാരണം നമ്മൾ സാധാരണ ഭാഷയിൽ തെറിയായിട്ട് കണക്കാക്കുന്നത് അവിടെ ഒരു ദൈവത്തിൻ്റെ സ്തുതിയായിട്ടാണ് പാടുന്നത്. അപ്പോൾ ഡൈനീഷ്യസിന് ഇതുപോലുള്ള പാട്ടുകളായിരുന്നു ഉണ്ടായിരുന്നത്. അതിൽ നിന്നാണ് സറ്റയർ ഉണ്ടായത്. വേറെസ് ദൈവത്തിന് നമ്മൾ സ്തുതിക്കുന്ന പാട്ടുകളിൽ നിന്നാണ് epic ഉണ്ടായത്. This is the distinction he makes in poetics. Represent men as worse than they are, men who have some defect provoking laughter. So comedy presents characters, comic characters. When a character can be comic, when he lowers himself. ഇപ്പോൾ സാധാരണ ഒരാൾ നടന്നു പോകുന്നതിൽ കോമഡി ഇല്ല. പക്ഷെ അയാൾ ഒരു മദ്യപൻ നടന്നു പോകുമ്പോൾ അയാളിങ്ങനെ നീളം വീതിയൊക്കെ അളന്നിട്ടാണ് നടക്കുക റോഡിൻ്റെ. അപ്പോൾ അതിൽ കോമഡി. സോ വെൻ യു അറ്റംപ്റ്റ് ടു ബിക്കം ലോവർ ദാൻ ഹീസ്, നമ്മൾ സാധാരണ നടന്നു പോകുമ്പോൾ കോമഡി ഇല്ല. പക്ഷേ വഴിയിൽ വല്ല പഴത്തൊലിയോ മറ്റോ ചവിട്ടി നിലത്ത് വീഴുകയാണെങ്കിൽ, ഒരാൾ വീഴുകയാണ് അല്ലെങ്കിൽ വെള്ളം ചവിട്ടി വീഴുകയാണെങ്കിൽ താഴെ വീഴുമ്പോൾ അത് ആൾക്കാരൊക്കെ ചിരിക്കും. ബിക്കോസ് ഹീ ഓർ ഷീ ഫോൾസ് ഫ്രം ഹിസ് സ്റ്റേറ്റസ്. അത് കുട്ടി വീണാൽ ചിരിക്കുന്നതിനെക്കാട്ടും വലിയ ചിരിയായിരിക്കും അധ്യാപകൻ വീണാലും, അതിനെക്കാട്ടും വലിയ ചിരിയായിരിക്കും പ്രിൻസിപ്പൾ വീണാലും. So similar. So what I have in mind is that when a person attempts to become lower than he is, he falls from his stature, there is comedy. And also Aristotle rules out Plato's notion that malicious pleasure as a basis of comedy. No, it is a pleasure arising from general folly, not of a individual. So ശുദ്ധ ഹാസ്യം എന്ന് പറയുന്നത് ആരെങ്കിലും കളിയാക്കിക്കൊണ്ടുള്ള ഹാസ്യമല്ല. ഇപ്പം ബോഡി ഷേമിങ് നിങ്ങൾ പറയും, അതല്ല ശുദ്ധമായ ഹാസ്യം. ശുദ്ധമായ ഹാസ്യം എന്ന് പറയുന്നത് ലാഫ് വിത്ത്. ഇറ്റ് ഇസ് നോട്ട് ലാഫ് അറ്റ്. ലാഫ് അറ്റ് ഈസ് യു റെഡിക്യൂൾ സംബഡി. വെൻ യു റെഡിക്യൂൾ സംബഡി ഇറ്റ് ഇസ് കോൾഡ് ലാഫ് അറ്റ്. ലാഫ് വിത്ത് ഈസ് ആക്ച്വലി യു ആർ ലാഫിങ് അറ്റ് യുവർ സെൽഫ്. ദിവസ്തംഭം മഹാശ്ചര്യം, നമുക്കും കിട്ടണം പണം എന്ന് കുഞ്ഞനമ്മേര് പറയുമ്പോൾ അത് ലാഫ് വിത്താണ്. റൈറ്റ്? He is not pointing his finger at somebody else, but rather himself and all the listeners. Epic follows the tragedy except the form of narration. So the difference between epic and tragedy, I told you earlier that epic and tragedy are of the same category, and Aristotle prefers tragedy to epic. The only difference between epic and tragedy is that there is a narration in epic, whereas in tragedy it is presentation. It cannot narrate. Epic can go on narrating incident after incident, but drama can only show the incident. It cannot narrate. Except that there is no much difference between drama, epic and poetry. Structure of a tragedy and epic are same. Out of the 6 constituent part, we were talking about 6 constituent part: plot, character, diction, song, spectacle. There was also one more. So out of the 6 constituent parts that you have in tragedy, epic has all that 4 except song and spectacle, which is peculiar only to tragedy. And he also maintains that one person need not conform to unities all the time. It is not possible either. It is better that you have followed the unity of action, but place and time can also be omitted if not possible. And one of the very interesting observations that Aristotle makes is that use of improbable and marvelous. Poetry and epic, drama especially, makes use of the marvelous, as I told you about spectacle, improbable and marvelous. And he said that the poet should prefer probable impossibilities to improbable possibilities. It's a very interesting quote which you can write in your exam. probable impossibility. It may be an impossibility, but probable, quite possible, rather than improbable possibility, that is impractical, that can never happen, right? For example, I can present myself or imagine myself as becoming anybody, hold any office in India. On the other hand, I can never imagine myself to be an American president, because I can never be, even if I am capable of, can never be a president of America, because I am not born there. But in India, I can imagine myself, or I can present myself to anything. You as well as you can also do that. But the idea is that probable impossibility is preferred over improbable possibilities, right? He prefers tragedy to epic. That's a point that I made earlier. Now, finally, we move to the last part of it. Yeah, I have a chat. Yeah, Prem has reminded me. That is like just last slide. Essentials of good writing are clear, clarity, and propriety. These are hailed as by Aristotle as the essential character of writing. Use of unfamiliar words brings surprise and novelty. Compound words for lyrics, rare and unfamiliar words for epic, and metaphorical language for drama. This is the observation that Aristotle makes for writing. And the style of prose is distinct from poetry because the prose employs a loose style where sentences held together by connective words, whereas poetry maintains a periodic or complete with a proper beginning, middle, and styles. Meaning, you have different styles in different kinds of writing. While prose makes use of a loose style, meaning so many sentences connected by connectors. Poetry makes use of periodic or poetic kind of utterance, which is more refined and also better. So the last slide are the questions. You can take a screenshot of these questions and just look at the presentation will be available on this website. And you can just, if there are any questions you find it difficult, I can answer either this class or the next class. Hope you have done with the screenshot. And also I have the paragraph questions. There are more paragraph questions from Aristotle, and we definitely expect questions in all the three formats. Essay questions I have not included. I'll be including this further later. So over to you, Prem. We come to the end of it.
Thank you.
Little more.
Thank you, Prasanth. So, students, I hope you have understood Aristotle. I know it's not very easy to understand, but those of you who have already studied, especially your sixth semester, you should maybe look into this once again and get your essentials perfect. And for those in fourth semester, please do keep learning, because you have any doubts, keep asking us so that we will try to clear it for you. Thank you, Prasanth. And please watch us. Please watch www.englishskillsone.com, and you will get the notification. Most probably it will be tomorrow 8 o'clock. Okay.
Yeah.
8:10. Sorry. Thank you. And
thank you. We'll meet tomorrow with the new chapter.
Right.
New author.
Good night, everybody.
Good night.